talk about paying for college, a crash course in paying for college. I have a presentation I do called Five Essential Rules. I tried to make it easier for people to look at what they needed to do next, kind of a to-do list. And that's how you should look at this when you're looking at listening to what I'm saying. And if you look at it later, look at it as a to-do list in order. So that's how I'll be presenting the material today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Susan Falk. I work with the Oklahoma Money Matters program. It's a financial literacy initiative with the Oklahoma College Assistance Program, and we work under the Oklahoma State Regents for Higher Education. I know that's a lot of information, but that's what we do. And at the end, we'll have a list of resources with a link to our website. So if you want to know more about what we do there, you can look at our website. First of all, we want to get an idea of who all is here, and so I can make sure that my information is geared toward the people in the meeting. I imagine we have a wide range of different groups here as I was looking at who had registered, but just so I know, great, I see a lot of people answering. Some high school counselors, some high school students and college staff, and others. Great. Let me look and see who the biggest group is here. High school counselors, great. The information I give today, the way I may say things may sound like it's for a counselor, but the high school students and college students that are here, these are also a list of to-dos for you. These are things that you can take action on and things that you can do yourself to help you figure out how to pay for college or post-secondary education. All right, looks like most everybody has answered, so I'm going to end that poll. Thank you for doing that. All right, let me get out of there. Oh, we have one person in a vet tech program. Great. Thank you, Amber, for that information. Make sure there's nobody else to let in here. Yes, there is. I'm going to keep this up here in case somebody else comes in. If one of my other hosts sees somebody that needs to be let in, if you can help me with this once I get started. All right, so let's get into it. The 5 essential rules that I have, I'll list each rule, and the information that is going to come after are strategies that you can use to help figure out how you're going to pay for college. So as you look at these, know that I'm going to talk about these later. The first thing we're going to talk about is starting the conversation early. Next is doing research. Then we're going to calculate what you can afford. And for you college students, you can still do this. This is still going to be valuable for you. We're going to evaluate special population options and funds that might be available for them. And then we're going to make decisions. So one of the things I like to get out of the way right away is that there's been a misconception for many years about college not being a good investment, and that student loans can't be paid off, colleges are too expensive for what you make, people can't get jobs. And the research shows that that just isn't true. Education is a good investment, especially college, and research indicates that it is. We'll talk a little bit about other pathways besides college today, but much of what we discuss is going to be how to pay for a college education. But all education after high school, training, certificates, career tech, all of those things cost money. And you can use all of these rules to help pay for any of those. So keep that in mind, especially for you high school counselors and college counselors that are helping people make their next decisions. So the first thing we want to talk about is starting the conversation early. And wherever you are in your education journey, that means now. So if you're working with young students, high school students, if you're in college and you haven't had these conversations, you need to start doing it. As I've been talking to high school students, particularly these last 2 years, what I found when I talk to high school students and parents is that they're not talking about the details of the college education, about how much it's going to cost and where the money is going to come from. And it was surprising to me how little detail families had about that part of going to college. And that was a problem because we all know about the student loan crisis, about the conversations around how expensive college is and how we can make it affordable for everyone. So having conversations about that is important because you can't make plans unless you start the conversation. So one of the things that some of the things that you can do, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the how and when instead of the what and who, because that kind of comes with conversations we're going to have earlier. Like I said, any education costs money. And right now, what I see in high schools is that many students aren't making the association that the career planning ICAP that they're doing in high school, their college planning and career planning, is to have a job and live independently after high school. It's really interesting to me when I go to college fairs that students who are going the tech route or getting a job right after high school, going into plumbing or electrical or going into one of the unions and learning how to do those things, they have a plan. They're usually going to start making money right away. They know where they're going to live. They know how they're going to get there. They already have a roommate. They've got it down. And the college students are walking around the fair and they don't have nearly as many solid answers. And it was really shocking to me. And I think there's this, I'm not making money yet. I'm going to have a job later, so they can kind of put all that off. But not knowing that can put you in jeopardy of not finishing college. And so that's why that should be part of the conversation. I tell students, if you haven't had this conversation with your parents, go home and do it. Ask them, have you saved money for my college? Are you going to help me in college? Are you going to help me with transportation? Will I have a car? Will you keep making my cell phone payment, etc.? And that's the kind of conversation they're having, not about, how much it's going to cost yet, not concrete answers, just, how and when are things going to get paid for? And that money conversation really makes people cringe sometimes, but it is so critical in this financial or economic environment that we live in today, with the complexity of student loans and how they get paid back and who gets forgiven, and FAFSA, the issues that we know that are the delayed FAFSA and things like that. Things are happening fast or late. And so knowing the most you can is going to make paying for college that much easier. So what are the strategies for this? Get talking. If you're a student, get talking with your parents. If you're a counselor, college or high school, plan info sessions that have example questions like this, and begin looking at websites with parents and families to get more information. Share resources like websites. We'll have a lot of those later on, and make the ICAP feel real so families can begin using it as a beginning to their planning, the high school, after high school planning, the ICAP. I know most people on here know what that is. And it's especially for you high school students that are on here, the ICAP is an important tool for you, and it can make what you're planning to do, whether it's college or something else, much more likely to happen and much more likely that you'll reach the goals you set for yourself if you take it seriously. And you can have example costs or budgets. You can invite recent graduates, high school graduates, to share what real life is like and what they wish they had done or what they did that was successful. Those are all really real good ways to get that conversation started. The next thing you want to do is do the research. What I mean by that is, after asking questions, is to get more specific. What do I want to do for a career, and how will it benefit me in the future? Your students are deciding what career will allow them to be that independent human being that all high school students want to be. Oh, I can hardly wait till I get out of high school and get to make my own decision and have freedom. And one of the things I like to point out to high school students is the freedom that you want won't be there unless you have a good plan and you're financially able to manage what comes next, because that is a big hurdle for a lot of students. So this kind of planning will make sure that you have that freedom that you want. One very powerful thing my youngest son said to me when I asked him, what is it you wish you knew about managing money as a young person that you didn't? What do you wish you had known? And his first reply was, I wish I knew that if I knew what my money situation was going to be and how to manage money better, I would have more freedom. Because all of his choices were made by how much money do I not have. And he said, that's a miserable place to be. So at least knowing that you're going to be short is better than not knowing at all. What we hope is that students make the connection between planning and the reality of making their plans happen. So I want to be a journalist. I want to go to OU. Well, how much college do I need? How many courses? How many years? What kind of classes? Where can I get that? Can I get those classes somewhere else? How much money am I going to make in that career? Is it worth the money that I'm going to spend? And how much will my education cost altogether? And have I prepared myself to take these classes and to get into this training? Have I taken concurrent classes? And those kinds of things. So this research is going to focus as much on cost as the decisions about what they want to do. And that's something else that I've seen in high school, is that those two things aren't going together. People talk a lot about, oh, I want to go, I've dreamed about going to school. This is the school I want to go to. But they don't talk as much about how much that's going to cost. The tools that we're going to share here on this page and further on, they really hone in on the information that students and families rarely see. I've talked to lots of parents and lots of students, and most of them have never seen this information before they make the decisions about what they're going to do for the rest of their life, or where they're going to go to school and spend so much money to go there. And that is one of the most important things that you can do, is do that research and find all those answers. Where else might I be able to get a journalism degree? What kind of journalism do I want to do? And sometimes you'll have several options for researching different careers, and that's okay. You might get a little bit different answers, but one of these links that we give you will help you more than others. It'll ring more true to you, and you can just, use that one. But let's look at those a little bit. So as you're doing your research, one of the first things you want to do is go to collegescorecard.ed.gov. Search and compare colleges, the fields of study that the student might be interested in, the costs, what admissions are like, what kind of results do they have at that college, how many people graduate from that degree, and there's also FAFSA information. This is a good, solid place to start, and you can enter a school that you think you want to go to, and it will give you so much information. And you want to make sure along the way, as you're doing this research we're going to go through, that you're writing this down. that you have something solid to look at later, because this is a lot of information. On the college scorecard, this is the type of thing that you might see. We just typed in University of Oklahoma, and we got all of these options. It's going to give you general information about graduation rates at that campus, the average cost, and the median earnings of people who graduate from those campuses. And this is general information. It's not as detailed as you're going to get in the next websites that we're going to look at, but it's a good place to start. The next thing, and this is so shocking to me too, is that many students don't know how much they're going to make in Oklahoma when they graduate, whether it's a 2-year school, a certification, a tech school, 4-year degree. They have a general idea, or they have an idea that they've seen on the internet, oh, these people make $100,000. What I love about the occupational employment and wage statistics is that it gives wage estimates for over 800 occupations in Oklahoma. What are people in Oklahoma making? And this can give you can see all of the tabs at the top. You can detail it down to the type of job, the type of area. You can compare wages, like, well, maybe I want to be a journalist, or maybe I wanted to be an editor. Maybe you want to compare those two and see how much they, what does each make? But this is important information. And for all of you students on there, do this, because it's going to help you a little later in our steps. You need to know how much you're going to make when you graduate. Okay, or have a good idea. So, number 3, you've had real conversations about money, and you've researched the careers. You see how much it will cost at different places, and now you can calculate the real cost of what it is you want to do. And this is the meat of what this presentation is about, so that you're aware of the real cost of what you want to do with your education, and you compare it to how much money you actually have. And what this does is make sure that you finish, that you don't have to drop out and then go back. One of the stories that I heard that was my impetus for creating this presentation was a Gear Up director at Rogers State. When I asked him, what's causing the problems for first-year students, we knew that a large number were dropping out, or a bigger number than we like to see in Oklahoma. And Gear Up is a program that helps students. They're supporting them and letting them know what they need to do next and what financial aid they can get. And they still had kids not making it. And he said the biggest problem was they do all the right things. They do their FAFSA, they go to our programs and our trainings, but they didn't factor in the real cost, the other costs of living at college. And he said one emergency makes them drop out. Their cell phone breaks, their roommate quits living with them, and they're responsible for all the rent, or they get sick, or their car breaks down. And he said and if several things happen, he said they're just lost. They don't have the money because they didn't calculate that in. They weren't prepared for all the financial costs of going to college. And that's what you want to do here. You've talked about what you want to do. You've researched, what each program costs, what the college costs, and now you can calculate, what can I really afford? And one of the things that our entire program at Oklahoma Money Matters and OCAP, and you can go to, saw some research a couple of years ago that said in choosing a new college, new financial advice suggests that students first consider what they can afford instead of starting with their dream school or first choice. And the older people on this conversation, on this presentation, have heard that before. We heard it when we were young. You know, what's your dream school? Be whatever you can be, whatever you want to be. That was the advice I got. I got, and I know we're trying to do better. But one of the things that we need to add into that conversation is, what can I afford? You know, that doesn't mean that you can't go to your dream school, because you've done the calculations and you see that it's more than you have. But maybe you just go back to the drawing board and figure out, well, I am set on going to OU and being a journalist. Right now, we don't have the money. What can I do to make that happen? And maybe you have to work for a year, or maybe you have to work several jobs instead of one job. We're not saying that you can't make your dreams come true, or get to the goals that you really want. You just need to understand the cost of it and what you can do to make it happen. And if you can't, then change the plan. You know, it's what college professionals agree, and I was a college instructor, my husband was a dean, my brother-in-law was a dean, my sister, you know, was at college. They all agree that students are it doesn't matter where you go, what students put into their college experience is what they're going to get out of it. I'm not arguing that going to Harvard isn't better than going to Rose State College, but for many students, their experience will be good if they decide they're going to make the most of wherever they choose. You know, if they're not going to go to class and go out partying every weekend at Harvard, they're going to do it at Rose State too. They're going to do it at both places. So a lot of it is what the student puts into it. So, you know, yes, dreams are there, but reality is there too. What can I afford? So let's look at some strategies. One of the things that is a new phrase that we use a lot now when we're talking about going to college is the return on investment. That's what I was talking about on that first slide, where people think that a college education isn't worth what you have to pay for it. Research says that's not true, but you want to be specific about that. What is your investment? How much are you going to make? Is what you're going to make after you graduate worth what you borrowed, or what you paid for education, whether you had to borrow or not? That is important. That's when people who borrow too much and can't make a living because they didn't take that into consideration, how much they were going to work, how much they were going to make. And in general, the rule of thumb is never borrow more money than you're going to make your first year of work. So if you pay $30,000 to be a journalist, are you going to make $30,000 your first year as a journalist? Those links that I gave you earlier, you can figure that out. You can know. Now, if you're being an architect or an engineer, something that takes 6, 8, 12 years, like a physician, my niece is a physician, that calculation's not going to work because their education just costs more. But in the end, my niece knows if she works for hospitals that serve clients in need, they will help pay off her huge loans that she has. And she planned for that. She didn't want to owe that, you know, close to $500,000 for the rest of her life. She wanted to know that she had planned, that her calculations were going to work, and that they could take care of part of that for her. And that's what you need to do too. Everybody needs to do that. And don't just think about it, write it down. One of the things we talk about when we're talking about spending money is to spend as little as possible up front, especially when we talk about getting student loans. We talked to many parents who said, you know, my student really wanted to go to OU or OSU or a private school. And when we put those calculations down on paper, they decided, this is what this is going to mean to me the day I graduate. I'll be making payments on this student loan, or I won't have enough to live on my own. And that's what we want to find out from those calculations. So to find out what you can afford, there's so many great calculators out there. And when you're doing the calculations, you're going to budget for living expenses, personal expenses for, buying new clothes or buying makeup. My twin has this really funny story about her daughter who finished college just this year. She went during COVID, and it was very difficult for her to finish during COVID and go online, and she just didn't do it. And she was using one of these calculators and was putting what she remembers spending using her credit card and other savings, etc. And she had $4,000 for toiletries and stuff for a year. And as we've been doing this presentation with different groups, a lot of mothers and parents think that's a low ball thing, which I crack up at because I don't spend anything on those type of things. But I was laughing because she said it when she really saw how much those kinds of things cost. It made a difference, and it can. So that's something you need to know about yourself. Are you paying for your own cell phone? There's communication costs here on MyFICO, and MyFICO is one of the most used calculators for figuring out how much you should budget for college living expenses. So that thing I talked about with the Rogers State Gear Up guy, that's one of the things students didn't plan on was living expenses, and that's what got them. That's why they had to drop out and then come back, or not drop out and never come back, or put them in an emergency situation. So knowing these things is important. You need to know, students need to know exactly how much things are going to cost so they can do these calculations properly. Yes, you know how much tuition is. You know how much financial aid you're getting. What are your personal costs? Another calculator you can use is called Bankrate. At Bankrate, they have one too. It's fairly similar. It puts in any loan payments like car payments or things like that you have. It will put in your how much you're putting into personal toiletries and clothing and entertainment, etc., so that you know how much you're going to be spending on those types of things. This is my favorite slide of the whole. I say that sometimes. No, this actually is. We talked about that return on investment. This website is called freeop.org. It's the website for the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. But one of the things that it does is it will use whatever college you go to and the degree that you get. And I don't know any that you couldn't find on here because it is extensive. And it will tell you what your return on investment is for the cost of your degree, no matter what the cost is, whether it's a student loan or you had savings to pay for it. That's not the issue right now. Right now, it's just how much did I pay for my bachelor's degree total. $30,000 is low, but that's what they put up here at the top. And it shows you what your return on investment is over your lifetime. And you can see at the top here when we put in biblical studies at Abilene Christian University, which a lot of students get, their lifetime return on investment is a negative. That is scary because so many students go there to get, that's what they're going there for. So you need to know that what is it I'm paying, and when I get out and I'm working in biblical study with that biblical studies degree, what is my return on investment going to be? This one, the next one, the biology general, I talk about this one a lot because I have a past professor who about 6 months ago said he will die paying off his student loans, and he had a PhD in biology, and he loved environmental science, and he loved going to school, and he got his bachelor's and master's and his PhD, and he took extra classes. Even when I was in his class in college, he was taking more classes. But what he loved to do was go out in ponds and scoop up minnows and do data on them. That doesn't pay a lot. And it's fine that he wanted to do that, but in retrospect, it's better to know how much you're going to make in that job specifically, which we had another link to find out specifically, what is the job I want going to pay, so that you're not in the negative over your lifetime. So this one is important, guys. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau also has a very comprehensive estimator for you and calculator that you can put your financial aid offer in, how much remaining costs you're going to have, all those other living expenses we talked about. It'll estimate how much you'll owe and if you can afford that debt with how much you're going to make or what you're making. And it can compare offers. So if you have several schools you're thinking about, it can show you all of those and compare those for you and help you to decide what to do next. We really like this one just because of its the broadness of it, how much information you can put in. And if you're going to use this one, just know ahead of time over here on the left, you're going to need your financial aid offers, that money that either you, your parents, your job, your loans, how much you're going to have available to pay, and other information that tells you what you'll need. But if you want to get really detailed, this one is a good one to use. And you can use more than one. The OK College Start website that we have on our team, they have a paper version of this. So if you're not a digital person, it's not as detailed as some of them, but it is a digital version and you can use this one. And we have a link for that at the end. Let me look at my time. Okay. So you've had the conversations, you've done the research, you've done your detailed calculations that you have digitally, that you can save digitally, that you can see it, or on paper and pencil. You've done all that. And now you know your return on investment. Can I afford this? Is it a good use of my money that I'm paying for my college education or your education after high school? And that investment has a lot of things involved. We talked about those things. It depends on you, the students, managing their money wisely. Is this a good way to spend my money? Do I know how much I'm spending on rent and toiletries and going out with friends? That they make a strong career choice. We saw those links where you could figure that out. Is this a good career choice with the money I'm spending? And then backing up your diploma with hard work and decisions after college. And that research that you did will help you do that. It will help you make, this is the career I'm going to, journalism may not get me there, but being working digitally and, writing articles for magazines might make more. Your research will show you that. And that making sure that return on investment is a decision that looks at your future too. And that's those first three steps helping you do that. Some of these things later also will tie into this. So let's get moving on to that. First of all, though, let's look at some special populations. OK College Start has information and resources on various populations that may be eligible for additional aid. And this is a great website to go to. There's other research that you can do, but if you're in one of these populations or you help students in these populations, there's some good basic information you can get from this website and other places. And we have links for those too. If you want to look at the OK College Start, you can see, click the Afford, go to okcollegestart.org, click Afford College, and making college more affordable will show up this page, and you can click these specific boxes to learn more. We're not going to go over all of them, just a few of them, but specifically military veterans, because what they can receive is so important and can be huge, especially for children of veterans who have died in the line of duty. There's more money for them. Most military veterans and dependents know about the GI Bill and college tuition. One of the things you want to do, though, is make sure that your college knows that if If you fill out the FAFSA, you'll get it, questions about this, but make sure that your college knows and that they're aware, because some colleges have specific money earmarked for college veterans. They should see it on your FAFSA, but just in case, make sure that they know. Oklahoma has the Oklahoma Heroes Promise for those deceased service members that we talked about. It covers a portion of tuition at private and other universities in Oklahoma. Oklahoma technology schools have a tuition waiver for veterans and children of certain service members. If they're declared missing in action, they also have a tuition waiver, which is a nice thing to know. The Oklahoma National Guard also has an educational assistance program with a revolving fund that's administered by the Oklahoma State Regents of Higher Education. You can find out about that also on this webpage. Foster care, on the FAFSA, you'll have dependency questions, and it'll ask at any time, has this student, since they were 18, were an orphan in foster care or a dependent or ward of the court? If they answer yes, they're going to be an independent student and they'll get more money. Oklahoma's Promise, all of us in our program talk about Oklahoma's Promise and getting kids signed up for it. It's so important. It offers tuition if you meet the requirements and you follow the rules. Tuition at Oklahoma universities and colleges. Somebody told me yesterday, I think Letha, who is on this call, that Oklahoma Promise can also go toward other things besides tuition. So if you have other scholarships that cover tuition, then Oklahoma's Promise could take over some of those other costs. And that's something you can talk to your financial aid officer about. Because some people get tuition covered by something else. So if you do, Oklahoma's Promise can go to help take care of other costs like housing, etc. That's an important thing to know. There's the foster care tuition waiver in Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Youth Promise Scholarship is also for students in foster care. And then the other two links at the bottom are really important in this ETV, the Education and Training Voucher. There's so many supports for students if they've been in foster care, things like coaches and training classes they can go to help them get more out of their education dollars. There's an Oklahoma Successful Adulthood Program, and I know most of the time when I talk to counselors, they already know about this, but here's some we'll have easy links to get to those. And this is where you can see those assigned education specialists that help students through education planning and disbursement of funding and finding other resources, etc. Native American students, all tribes are different. You must contact your tribe. If you have trouble contacting your tribe, you can go to the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs, click on specific tribes and learn more about what they have to offer. But this is very tribe specific, so going to your tribe is the most important thing here. Homeless and unaccompanied youth. I talked to many students who are independent students or have been or are homeless when I'm talking to high school students, and knowing what you can qualify for is very important, especially when filling out the FAFSA. You could get SNAP benefits once you get into college if you've had SNAP benefits before and you're homeless, or if you've just had them before, so you want to check into that. And there are supporting agencies such as the National Association for Education of Homeless Children and Youth. They have a national website, has a lot more information and resources that those students could be qualified for. And there's a flow chart down here, and we'll have a link to that also. If you're homeless, the FAFSA will have questions for you about what you might be able to receive, and be sure and look for information from the financial aid office about details on those things and what you need to qualify for those resources. And there's several links on the OK College Start website for those. Athletes, usually if you're getting a scholarship or you're at the high school, your coaches are taking care of these things. But I worked in online education for a long time, and I saw several online students who did not get to play at all or their first year because these rules weren't followed. Because a lot of times students are playing, when they're in online school, they may not be playing for a school team, or they may be playing for club teams, things like that. They are going to go to college and they don't follow these rules that are required by the NAIA and the NCAA about assuring that the amateurism standards are held, make sure that their eligibility, that they've maintained what they need to be eligible to play, etc. So it's really important that just to be sure that you're checking on these things and make sure that things happen that were supposed to happen as an athlete. Students with disabilities, a lot of the counselors on here are aware of what colleges do for students. They receive services under the disabilities umbrella. They do have to go to the college and declare that they have a disability, whatever it is, whether it's a physical or ADHD or whatever it is. My daughter had a reading disability and ADHD, and she went to the support center. Some places have a disability center, and let them know, and had her testing, her suggestions by the person who did the testing and the school about what would help her with college, and she was able to do those things for herself and make sure that she got the help she needed. So students need to do that, or if students don't feel comfortable yet doing that, they can have their parent go with them to do that. In Oklahoma, currently there are programs for students with more severe disabilities who may not be able to take full-time regular classes in college, where they can get a college experience, and we have those listed on the left, and we'll have links to those so that they can, if you know of somebody that wants to be included but can't go to a regular college and stay on by themselves, that they can research those. And you can see the link at the bottom. It's inclusive post-secondary education programs, and it's so exciting. One of the things that we did learn in our training this year is that Oklahoma has included Oklahoma's Promise for these programs, so that students can use that if they want to. They can be in Oklahoma's Promise and use that funding for these programs, which is exciting. I got chill bumps when I heard that. I've worked with students with learning disabilities for a long time, so that was exciting for me. And then working while you learn is another strategy. AmeriCorps is one of the programs that some students use to get money from working. Of course, students can work and get a part-time job. I think the research now is 67% of college students work part-time. Work study, you'll see that on your FAFSA if you qualify for a job that the federal government helps fund through the college, and it's called work study, that can help pay for your college. And then there are other tuition assistance benefits, such as employees help paying for tuition or other benefits associated with going to college. And I'm really surprised, almost every time I go out and talk to high schools now, there's a student who started working for a specific employer because they will help pay for their education. and it's a growing thing for younger students to do. I've always heard of adults doing that, getting help after the fact. They go to work for a company and they help pay for their tuition. But for students in college, in high school even, this is a growing trend. And you can go to the Oklahoma Higher Ed website to see more of those companies in Oklahoma who will help do that. And the last thing here, let me see how much time I have. We have just about enough time to finish up here, is to make decisions and finish strong. You've done your research, you've had conversations, done your research, you've done the calculations, looked at the data, and now you want to make a decision. And you'll use the calculators to make sure that you have that really honed down to what you can afford. What level of training do you need, and what schools are available for the training that I need or the classes that I need, and if there's available scholarships at that school, what funding is available at those schools. And one of the last things we have here is shop around. If you're having difficulty making the funding match with what you want to do and where you want to go, make sure that you compare those two. Look at what it will cost, and then look at another school. Maybe it costs less. Go to the financial aid office and say, I'm looking at this school and this school. What can you do? What kind of scholarships can you offer me? How much is it going to cost total here? So that you're sure that you have the best price for what you want to do if you're flexible. Some strategies for this is completing your FAFSA. We've heard that December is that's correct, right, Letha, that December is the opening for the FAFSA for next year. We're not sure of the date yet, but it's in December. There's also one of the most important things to help students make decisions about where they want to go is a college visit. My twin says her daughter was on a scholarship but had to pay some on her own, an athletic scholarship, and she visited several schools. They would walk on campus, she'd go for a visit, they would get in the car, and she said, well, not going there. And she just knew that was not the place for her. And most students will feel that. They will feel something about the environment or the people they met or just the way that college visits or the dorms look, and they know right away whether they want to go to school there. And I would suggest any college that you think that's where I can afford to go, that's where I want to go, that you do a visit first and make sure. Career fairs are a good place to go to help you make decisions. And counselors, you can provide scholarship resources, you can have individual senior meetings with kids to help them make those decisions, or you can invite one of our speakers to help give you more information about scholarships and things like that. So the Finish Strong strategies, one of the after you've made your decision, you're going to complete your applications. You're going to need to get recommendation letters, contacting the financial aid office and finding out for sure what they're going to be able to offer, or if they're not offering enough, you can't afford to go to where you want to, call them and ask, is there anything else available? Continuing to apply for scholarships. Letha and I talked yesterday. She's in our You Can Go To office about applying for scholarships and good strategies for doing those. We'll have links at the end for that, and I'll be sending those to you so that you can have those links to apply for scholarships and find scholarships. One of the things I told her was that a man had told me his two daughters had over a 4.0 and had done all of their community service and applied over and over for scholarships and didn't receive them. And then we found out they were only applying for the huge ones, the 10,000, 20,000 Gates scholarships. And they weren't looking at ones that were specific for them. their interests, and maybe smaller local scholarships like the Oklahoma City Community Foundation scholarships that we've heard that a large percentage of students who apply for those scholarships get them. And Tulsa Community Foundation has those also. Looking at local is a good way to begin so that you can see what is right around you that you can apply for. Getting summer jobs, one of the things that I tell high school students all the time, no matter what age they are, is when you go to college, the thing that will make you feel best is having money in your pocket for emergencies or going out for pizza with the guys. When I walked on campus, didn't know I was a first generation college student, and I did not have any money when I walked on the college campus. I knew I had a full scholarship and I was going to be able to eat in the cafeteria, but besides that, you have to have money. And I tell high school students all the time, nothing will make you feel better than having the security that provides. And getting jobs and starting to save is one of the easiest ways to do that. And knowing that you are doing that, I'm taking responsibility for that. It will give you so much confidence, and it will may help you from having to quit because of an emergency. Having that emergency fund and saving for those things so that you know that you have enough. But your research, your conversation, your research, your calculations should have you there already. But just keep saving, keep working, and knowing that you have that money in your back pocket. We talked about the Oklahoma College Start. You can practice a college application there and take virtual campus tours. Career fairs are good places to go think about careers and talk to people who are actually doing jobs. If you want to be a fireman or you want to be a nurse, you're going to see people there who are doing that. Scholarship resources, we have a guide called Are You Looking for Money? And you can go to where they also have scholarship information and ways to search for scholarships and get information sent to you about looking for scholarships. And we can also help you too, OKMM, and you can go to, we can come speak to students. The same presentation I'm giving now, I give to a lot of high school students, counselors, parents, go all over doing that. And make sure I don't have anything written here I've forgotten. And the last thing is to look at these rules, steps, and go through each one and be purposeful about it. Write it down. Have the hard conversations. If you're a high school student on here, go have that conversation with your parent now. If you're a counselor, encourage students to do that. Encourage parents to do that. Make it possible for them to have that conversation. Use the links to do the research. What is it I want to do? How much is it going to cost? What are my living expenses are going to do? How much is this college compared to this college? What was my career return on investment going to be? Do all of that research in detail and then calculate, okay, this is how much money we have. This is where I want to go. Can we afford that? And you'll be able to figure that out from those links that I gave you in this list. Look and see if there's any extra monies available, number 4. And then I got 2, a 5 and a 6 instead of having make decisions and finish strong. Those two go together. Make your final decisions. Maybe it's more than one college. Apply. Go have your career visits. Keep writing for scholarships. Keep making money and saving. And that's it. I hope that this information was helpful. If anyone has any burning questions, you can type them there in chat. I will be sending this to all of you, this slide presentation in a PDF with the links that you can see that so that you can get that information. Next month in September, they're going to have a Completing the FAFSA webinar on September 17th at 12 with You Can Go To. That'll be very important information since, there are a lot of changes, and the dates when you can complete the FAFSA for the coming up year is going to be different. And thank you, Karina. If anybody has questions, you can hang around and ask me after everyone leaves, or you can type them in here. I'll also have my you'll have my email when I send you that information, and you can ask me those questions then. I will have these links and we'll send those to you. So you can be looking for those in the next few days, make it a lot easier for you to go through this, and you can see, number one, what do we do? Number two, you can make this out into a list for parents and kids and have workshops for them to start this. It makes it really easy for individual students or families to start this process. And one of the things when I did a presentation like this before, I had a dad came up to me and he said, what I liked about this is that I knew all of this, but I didn't know what order to do. I didn't know where to start. And this gives people a starting place. Where can I start? What can I do practically? But that is all I have today. We finished a few minutes earlier. I give you four minutes back in your day. I appreciate everyone being here, and I'll hang around for a few minutes for anyone that wants to ask questions. But thank you all for attending.